Good afternoon. The Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing now convenes the Special Economic Service meeting. Meeting notices were given to the media on July 10th and July 14th. For the record, today is Tuesday, July 18th. The time now is 2:08. I will now call the Special Economic Service meeting to order. I'd ask the staff to call the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Guam Legislature's Committee on Ways and Means, Chairman Senator Joe S. San Agustin.
Present.
Office of the Finance and Budget, Director Stephen Guerrero.
Present.
Office of Public Accountability, Public Auditor Benjamin Cruz. Bureau of Budget Management and Research, Director Lester Carlson. Department of Revenue and Taxation, Director Daphne Shimizu. Department of Administration, Director Edward Byrne. Which you could announce. Deputy. Okay, Lisa Fisher. Guam Economic Development Authority Administrator Melanie Mendiola.
Tina Garcia is standing in her place.
Department of Labor Chief Economist Gary Hiles. Bureau of Statistics and Plans for Chief Economist is Deputy Director Matthew Santos.
Present.
Guam Visitors Bureau Director of Tourism Research and Destination Development, Nico Fujikawa.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, we have reached a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize my colleagues that have joined me, my Vice Chair, Senator Tello Taitagui. Good afternoon. And with that, we'll begin with the, we're going to follow the agenda. There'll be no questions asked, only briefings presented. And then at the end, then we'll open for questions, okay? We'll begin with the revenue tracking from BBMR, DOA, and DRT, as needed. Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And hello, Senator Taitagui, Mr. Guerrero. Right after the typhoon, we got a couple phone calls, emails, both from Standard & Poor's and Moody's, following up on some of the sensational journalistic reports about the damage on Guam. One that was reported on Fox News that said 1 in every 5 homes was destroyed. So they needed to kind of get a feel for how the island was faring and how recovery was taking place. So we went ahead and did a more formal interaction with Moody's. But S&P affirmed our bond rating and affirmed our outlook as being stable. So they saw the progress that we had made before the typhoon, the fact that we had reserves, the fact that we were appropriating money that we had available for various purposes to budget amendments. And Moody's basically affirmed both our existing bond ratings and, more importantly, affirmed the positive outlook. So we had that interaction. The Moody's press release was dated June 16th, so of course the interaction that we had with Moody's occurred before that. So essentially, 3 weeks after the storm, we had a discussion with them, and we provided them the same publicly available information that we provide to the legislature and the public. So, if I may, sir, I'd like to start out with item number 3 on the agenda. You had asked for the June Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report draft. So I provided that. Basically, it's 2 pages marked on the bottom, 2 of 10 and 3 of 10. So you will see it for the month of June. We did very well. We were looking at revenues that were adopted for the quarter at about $222 million, and we got 249, which is a $27.3 million favorable outcome through all the various tax categories that constitute the general fund. If you go to the next page, page 3, this is a very good summation of where we are currently. If you look on the 4th column over from the left, you'll see the adopted revenues for the full year. Remember that we started out at 809. The legislature made several budget amendments, and that brought FY23 up to 852. We are currently tracking at 889, or $36.9 million over the adopted level. Right below that, you see that there were a couple of appropriations that didn't have a budget amendment to them. One was the LEAP program, and the other was the GPA credit round 3. So you take the 36.9, you take out the cumulative 25.8, and we're still in the black to the tune of $11.1 million. So from a general fund standpoint, we are doing very well. We have been able to absorb the budget adjustments that were made, and those adjustments, for the record, are on the left side under footnotes, and they primarily constitute $16 million for the general pay plan, and then funding for the judiciary for the general pay plan, EOG for the general pay plan, GCC for the general pay plan, Mayor's Council for the general pay plan, Public Defender Service Corporation for the general pay plan, and DOE for repairs and maintenance. So that is a cumulative total, and then an adjustment made to the pharmaceutical fund because of the increased revenue from BPT. So from a general fund standpoint, Mr. Chairman, we're doing very, very, very well. I'd like to go to the next report, which is the special fund tracking report. It's this one right here with all the different special funds on it. And of note, we had a very, very, very good month for the Tourist Attraction Fund. We reported $3 million in collections during the month following the typhoon. And as you can tell, that with no adjustments to the appropriation allocation report, we are looking at about $8.5 million in the black, over and above the adopted level for the Tourist Attraction Fund. And even if we stopped for the months of August and September and we didn't collect another dime, we'd still be $5.6 million over the adopted level. We know that's not going to happen, but it's just an indication that the amount of hotel rooms and the utilization is very, very robust. Solid waste, I'm going from right to left. Solid waste is in the black, basically $1 million better than the appropriated level. We do have back-to-back concerns with the Healthy Future Fund, which has been kind of tracking over the last few years a little lower than the adopted level. I'm not sure. I know people are still drinking. There's only one person that I see in this table here that smokes. So there might have something to do with maybe a switching of vices from tobacco to vape products, because you still see. We still have a lot of vices, but it's not showing up in revenue collections. The Guam Highway Fund, we made some adjustments to the Guam Highway Fund by augmenting it with general fund money to be able to allow for the gas tax relief, which I think everybody's still very appreciative of. GEFF is nominally short, $685,000 is what it's tracking. And the Customs and Inspections Fund is tracking just $323,000 below the adopted level. So on the agenda, shortfalls and projected revenues, by and large, the general fund is performing magnificently, but we do have some areas in special funds that we really should take a look at. And the Guam Highway Fund, that's work that's primarily funding secondary and tertiary road repairs. So I know that the $5 million subsidy from the general fund was allocated to ease the pain at the pump, and if there was a desire to continue that, albeit I would recommend temporarily, because we still do need to have a dedicated funding source for secondary and tertiary road repairs. But if the substitute bill comes out recommending a temporary extension of this, I could certainly support that. Healthy Future Funds, though, has been a source of concern for the last 2 or 3 years. I think we were looking a little bit too optimistically at taxes from that group, and we're just not seeing it. So we might have to revisit that number for 2024. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Shimizu for item number 4.
The information that I'm going to be going over is found in one of the worksheets that was provided that's labeled Special Economic Service Meeting, Tuesday, July 18, 2023, DRT Responses. And there are 2 pages to that particular worksheet. And so for item number 4, which is FY 2023 Advanced Tax Credit Amounts Updates. So the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 authorized the federal government to fund EITC beginning with tax year 2021. For what is referred to as post-2021 tax years, which is tax years 2022 going forward, the U.S. Treasury's initial funding for EITC for this calendar year was $56.1 million. And for the child tax credit, which includes the additional child tax credit, $62.67 million. And that's a total of $118.7 million. And this is the initial funding for years after 2021. So that's for 2022 tax years moving forward. In FY 2023 through June 30, 2023, Guam DRT processed unpaid refunds, which included $44,939,511 in EITC and $50,231,821 in child tax credits, again to include the additional child tax credit. In terms of other advancements or reimbursements, there was $1.87 million that was paid out in rebate recovery credits of which $717,478 was paid in January through June 2023. And as you may remember, rebate recovery credits were the portion of VIP which is paid out when you file your return. So for FY 2023, through June 30, 2023, EITC, CTC, including ACTC, and other advancements and reimbursements totaled $97,042,082. And that is item number 4.
Okay, back to me for item 5, FY 2024 assumptions supporting revenue projections. Refer you to the legal size sheet that we provided. And we have broken this out. The first page up to the top of the second page really constitutes the general fund. So we have provided for this committee the FY 21 budget audited numbers, FY 22 unaudited actual numbers from the CRER. That would be in column C. Then we've got 23 revenues with the adoption of some amendments that brought the FY 23 level up to $852 million. And then our revenue tracking, which I went over recently, we're at $889,260,989. The governor's FY 2024 executive budget request, the gross is $879,076,932. And in column G, we basically are comparing the variance between the FY 24 executive budget request and what we're tracking. So ordinarily, you would look at that as a positive number, but we're looking at it from a reverse angle and basically letting you know that the executive budget request gross is 879. We are tracking 889. So the executive budget request is $10 million below what we're tracking. As you go down the list for the various tax categories, you can see the cumulative total income taxes. We have the numbers that for in column G for you to peruse, and we have BPT broken out for you. We have the Section 30 broken out for you. The one area I'd like to point out that might be increasing is under use of money and property. The interest rate environment was really bad the first part of fiscal 23. It has since been very favorable to people that have money sitting in the bank. So we may actually achieve a higher number than the executive budget request. That's a nominal amount of $45,000. We're probably going to be somewhere closer to $1 million for the entirety of 2024 because of the interest rate going from less than 1% to currently something in the neighborhood of 5%. Then all the way down to licenses and permits, and if I could take you to the next page, we have total general fund revenue collections. Then we take out the 2% general fund reserve, and we're still at that $10 million difference between the governor's executive budget request at 778.9 and our tracking at 789.9. So taking just the general revenue accounts into consideration at this point in time, we are faring extremely well, and even including the set-asides for the reserve, netting out the pharmaceutical fund. We also went through and netted out Harmon Industrial Park, the Tejan Gym, the National Tennis Federation, and the Youth Football Federation, which were all recently done, but are reflected in a reduction in BPT due to the tax credits that were provided to those organizations. So from a general fund standpoint, the FY24 executive budget request at this point was 778. Our tracking is 789, and again, we're about close to $11 million. It's $10,960,000, so let's call it $11 million better through the month of June. Going down the special revenue funds, we broke it out and made a point to take into consideration some of the changes that the legislature has done, like the air pollution control special fund. That's now a special revolving fund. So that basically is something that goes, all the funds collected are specific to uses, I believe, for Guam EPA. Similarly, you see a note for the Guam Museum Fund, about halfway down, because there was a change in statute that took all of the Guam Museum Fund and put it over to the Guam Preservation Trust. So that is one of the areas that we are tracking to make sure we're in compliance with recent law. Another one of those is the Pesticide Management Fund. It's now a special revolving fund. So again, I believe that's that program's managed by Guam EPA. So it's not revenue, it's just programmatic funding. So you'll see a zero there for obvious reasons. The Guam Highway Fund, again, the tracking difference is attributed to the fact that we gave a liquid fuel tax holiday. So of course we didn't collect money, but we supplemented that funding with general fund money. So by and large, the legislature did a good job of being able to ensure that there was funding, but albeit coming from the general fund to augment the Guam Highway Fund, and provide everybody an ongoing 18 cents per gallon reduction in the cost of gasoline. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for that and for the ongoing GPA power credits. I'm sure I speak for everybody here. That's very much appreciated. Healthy Future Funds. Again, historically, when you look across the columns, we're at 42 million in fiscal 21. The unaudited 22 numbers that we have in column C are at 36 million. $40 million in FY23, and we're only tracking 33 so far. Our executive budget request is at 35, so that area there we're going to have to take a look at, simply because it's fairly obvious it's not tracking as we would like it to be. Other than that, you can go through some of the other special funds that continue on to page 2, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that our revenue tracking for the TAF is 24.6 million, and the executive budget request was 24.5. So we were in the ballpark, and we saw what happened with COVID and the rebound in tourism, and then how we're dealing with Mawar, and how we're seeing very robust hotel occupancy. So at the end of the day, we're looking cumulatively at about a revenue tracking total special fund is 990. The executive budget request is 981. So similar to the general fund, we're ahead of where we otherwise would be, just based upon all of these special funds cumulatively resulting in $990 million of anticipated collection versus the 981 contained in the 2024 executive budget request. So even though there are some areas that we need to address, by and large, it is outperforming expectations as a whole, but we do have to look at some of the parts. And I think that basically takes care of item 5, so I'll give it back to Mrs. Shimizu.
Okay. So with regards to item 6 is FY 2024 estimated tax credit advancements or reimbursements. And of course, as we discuss the budget for FY 24, probably what's most significant to share with the SES members and also, of course, with the legislature is that with regards to these particular credits, CITC, CTC, and CTC, we don't expect to see a whole lot of change in the tax law relating to these particular credits now. We did see quite a few changes because of COVID. And of course, we saw increases in the child tax credit. We saw the characterization of credits move from being non-refundable to refundable. But now we're seeing some level of normalcy with the Internal Revenue Code. And so we don't expect to see, again, changes or significant changes in the characteristics for these moving forward, which is from 2022 going forward. If you'll go ahead and refer to the worksheet which we provided, what we did here was we utilized averages for the earned income tax credit. The average that we saw for FY 2018 to 2022 is $52.4 million. And for the child tax credit and additional child tax credit together, we didn't include 2022 fiscal year because of the single year changes in the CTC and ACTC. But the average FY 2018 to 2021 CTC and ACTC was about $52.8 million. With regards to any other advancements or reimbursements, which is basically the rebate recovery credits, and that's why I wanted to make sure that in the section 4 above, the third column, you'll see where we only paid out $717,478 this calendar year. What we're expecting to see is these particular credits begin to be phased out. And so, we're going to have one of the credits not be able to be claimed anymore, I believe, after this year, and I believe the other 2 credits in the next year. And that is item number 6. I can go ahead and move forward to item 7. All right, so item 7, tax refunds and collections. And so if you'll look again in the item 7 section of the DRT response worksheet, what we did was we went ahead and pulled the information, that particular box there, from the refund liability reports, which are filed on a monthly basis with the legislature. And we wanted to show, again, not just how we're doing now, but how we were doing in relation to the prior years. So as of June 30, 2023, for tax year 2022 only, meaning for current year tax returns, 55,745 income tax returns were filed, of which 48,547 of them were refund returns. And of those 48,547 refund returns, 44,020 returns were processed and paid. And that 44,020 returns that were processed and paid equate to about $112.82 million. Now, there are about 2,200 returns that are processed and awaiting payment, and the dollar amount of those 2,232 returns is estimated to be about $5.63 million. And of course, you could see the information for the current tax year as of June 30, 2022, where as of that time we had about $19.57 million, which was for 6,099 returns that were awaiting payment at that time. And then as of June 30, 2021, again in the far right column, the fourth column for tax year 2022 only, we had about 9 million. And so again, that was sitting and waiting to be paid at that time. And so, you know, we're seeing the amount of refunds being paid more quickly, and that the amounts of refunds that is left to be paid to our people is going down. And if you'll move to the next page, page 2, right at the top of the page in the box. So as of June 30, 2023, total fiscal year 2023 refunds paid for all tax years, meaning it could be for a current tax year for 2022, or someone could have filed their 2021 return in 2023. We paid out $143.8 million so far, and that's as of June 30, and that is for 49,088 taxpayers. And just as a side note, we did actually just process yesterday refunds through June 4 file date. And so we're just a little bit over a month or in terms of the turnaround or the turnaround time for the payment of refunds. For item 7B, which is the impact of the increased business privilege tax exemption threshold per Public Law 36-81, what we wanted to point out was that there were three public laws that actually preceded Public Law 36-81, but which relate to what we call the limited exemption for certain small businesses, or LEXB. And those were Public Law 35-13, which was signed into law on May 7, 2019 and became effective on January 1, 2020. And it increased the exemption amount. So there was an exemption of 2% of the 5% BPT, and that was for those companies that had gross receipts below $250. And so for those companies that had gross receipts below $250, the first $100,000 was exempt from 2%. And then there was Public Law 35-90. That was signed into law on June 26, 2020, and it had a retroactive effective date. So it was effective January 1, 2020. And so it further increased that 2% exemption and made it so that for those businesses that made $500,000 or less, the first $250,000 was subject to the 3% and not to the full 5%. But that particular law had a sunset. And so a little bit less than a year later, on June 11, 2021, Public Law 36-27 was enacted, and it removed the sunset provision from the most recent LEXB law. And then we came to March 10, 2022, when Public Law 36-81 was signed into law. It had an effective date of January 1, 2022, and it increased the exemption further so that now for those companies that had gross receipts of $500,000, the entire $500,000 was only subject to the 3% and not the full 5% BPT. And so if you'll look in that particular section to the right where it says FY 2022, for FY 2022, the impact on BPT was, or for those companies that reported on line 14A of the Form GRT1, LEXB was $5.2 million. And that is the information for item 7.
Okay, for item number 8, federal assistance funds availability. First item is ARP. We provided to the body on July 5th, as required, the latest ARP spending report. And we did have as I mentioned earlier, when it came to use of money and property, a significant increase in the amount of interest earned. And we allocated that money to a few different areas. Most notably, $3 million to the governor's office for work that they have ongoing throughout the rest of the term of the availability of these funds. BBMR provided $40,000 out of our $90,000 allocation to GMH for an infant hearing diagnostic equipment. It's called Awake ABR. And I'm sure all of you can appreciate the fact that the earlier that you can diagnose a child's ability to hear and make proper adjustments has so much benefit associated with it. So the equipment at GMH is dated. We thought it would be appropriate use for the community, health related, child development related. So we went ahead and I raised my hand. I said, I'll fund that from the allocation that we have. We also have an issue with the Post Commission. As you might have heard, the Chief of Police was named recently as the acting Post chairperson, or lack of a better word. So we actually funded from now until the end of the ARP period of availability, $657,000 to fund the activities for the Post Commission. And the Guam Fire Department, as a transition with the Guam Police Department in a combined updated communication system, needed $1.4 million for a bridge for local mobile radio system. They call it LMR. So while they're working together to get to a point where they're going to be combined communications, GPD is not supporting the LMR funding in the interim. So that funding was made available for the fire department for that specific purpose. Those are the most notable changes that were provided. And if you go to page 7, under item 37, you'll see the Guam Memorial Hospital infant audiological equipment. That's kind of refers to what it was I was talking about. And those are the highlights for changes that were made in the American Rescue Plan. And I will remind everybody that the bulk of the funding came from interest that was earned to make those adjustments. Typhoon Mawar. We were authorized under 2 different public laws to be able to find within the general fund up to $50 million to fund storm recovery. We were further given additional authorization to include needs specifically for DOE, I believe, and their needs. So the accumulation of Typhoon Mawar, of course, when we did the emergency declaration, there was $250,000 that came from the director's office out of public health. And then we had a requirement to provide each mayor with $100,000, and I'm sure you're all aware that each mayor received a check for $100,000. So that obligation has been met. I had a discussion with the acting superintendent of education, former Speaker Wonpat, and I basically informed her of my intent to take the $20 million that was appropriated for DOE to facilitate repairs, mold mitigation, fence replacement, and then there was a subsequent public law that talked about the possibility of assisting them with the purchase of generators. And we took that money and we have set up a fund over at the Department of Administration, and that's where we have the funding that I have cobbled together so far. It's $28,104,000 cumulatively. $20 million, of course, came from the DOE appropriation with the speaker, former speaker's blessing. And I do have D-land tickets showing that there is active engagement over at Homeland for the mold mitigation and the assessments. And I think we all understand that mold can only be addressed once power is restored, once the air condition is back on, climate control is achieved. But rest assured that once those conditions present themselves, then the mold mitigation will be taken care of through our recovery efforts spearheaded by Office of Homeland Security. So the D-land tickets are there. I spoke with Charles Esteves prior to coming here today for an update, and he wanted me to relay that as far as the fences are concerned, the Guard is still actively on school campuses removing storm debris, and once the debris is removed, there's already a chain on order, the fence material, but it doesn't make any sense to fix a fence while you still have like a whole bunch of trees you got to pull out. So everything, while we'd like everything to have been done yesterday, quite frankly, power restoration is a big factor in mold mitigation. And then as far as other areas within the school and fence repair or replacement, we need to get the debris out first. So there was a bill that was passed by the body that the governor signed into law. It had to do with a $3.1 million appropriation for food commodities. And in the governor's message to the speaker, she signed the bill into law, but pointed out that there was a clause in the authorization for the food commodities that if any other source of funds are available, then this appropriation is basically not necessary. So her message addressed the efforts that were utilized in, I think it was summer of 2021, before the end of the fiscal year, to make food commodities available, thus negating the need for that savings that we got from refunding a BPT bond. The authorization from the legislature said up to $5 million. Well, we only got 3.1, and that 3.1 was again appropriated to public health for distribution to nonprofits, for the nonprofits to provide various food commodities to those in need. So that money, because we had already done that in, I believe it was the summer of 21, could be 22, but that 3.1 was available, so that's part of the 28. And then we got a reimbursement, which I never thought would happen, but apparently we got CARES Act money, and one of the areas that we got a reimbursement for use was quarantine facilities. So we got, I think, it's like $4.6 million reimbursed from federal funds by FEMA. I'm sure you're all aware that GMH also got some reimbursements for traveling nurse costs. And I never thought that the federal government would reimburse us for money that the federal government gave us, but hey, look, I like it when I'm wrong. So we use that money as well. So that is the sum of the $28 million that we have. And we do have these DOE matters as high priority over at Homeland. We are trying to assess and revisit when things can be done as they become available, given circumstances and, again, environmental conditions associated with actually addressing mold issues. So we do have Homeland actively engaged in that. The governor and chief of staff have told both the Homeland Security Advisor and Mr. Esteves himself how much of a priority it is to get the mold issues and other issues associated with being able to get the schools ready for opening addressed. So a lot of it's storm related, a lot of it has a little bit of overlap, but at the end of the day, we have DOE's best interest at hand. And Speaker Wonpat was very grateful and appreciative and supportive of the utilization of that appropriation, because she felt that the efforts that, and the resources up at Homeland for recovery would be a more efficient and effective way to address those issues. So that is my Mahwah report. And as far as the FEMA reimbursement, we haven't really closed out any, they call these things projects. They start out as being tickets, then they have a project number assigned to them. We haven't closed out anything yet and submitted it to FEMA for reimbursement. I would imagine that at some point in time, we could probably make a case for reimbursement for the Guard, because we are using Guard personnel and equipment on a wide range of activities. You used to see them out there for traffic control. You see their heavy equipment out and about, and they are assisting primarily with the debris removal at the schools. So I'm not sure whether or not we can do like a quarterly closeout and then submission to FEMA for like Guard activities. They're very well documented and the time is well kept. But so far, we are extremely cognizant of the parameters under Public Law 37-17, that the idea was to make sure that we use whatever monies that we get from the general fund in a manner such that reimbursement from FEMA is expected, not maybe, but very, very high likelihood of achieving a reimbursement. So that still is something very, very, right there in front of us. So. I think that's it for that section.
All right. All right, thank you. We'll have now the OPA Speaker Cruz. I'd like to ask Dr. Jones, could you please join us up here on the table? Because if you wanted to make comment on economic at the end, towards the end, ma'am. Oh, you're okay? Okay. Sir, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As most of you may have seen in a newspaper release, Mr. Burns sent to the bond market a letter dated, I think, the 27th of June, notifying them that because of the typhoon and the change in who the audit is being done, going from Deloitte to EY, and the fact that, I'll explain it later, but you want the answer. The answer is that in that letter, he has notified the bond market, I imagine all of you, that the GovGuam audit will not be released until the end of August.
All right, thank you. Now we'll have Gita. Ms. Garcia?
Thank you, Senator. Regarding debt service management for fiscal year 2024, we have been looking at all the bonds, and as of today, we've maximized our refunding opportunities with the last refinancing with the HOT, the business privilege tax bonds, and JFK in 2021. There's nothing on the books today for 2024 for refinancing.
All right, thank you. GVB.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To address the items on number 11, first the FY 2023 tourism status update. If you could just follow with me on the presentation that we provided. Oh yeah, thank you. So on the first page, let's look at what we've already welcomed for the month of June. We released this, I believe, last week. June really shows the impact of Typhoon, I call it Typhoon Maywar because it was war on the month of May. But the typhoon effects obviously happen afterwards. So from flight cancellations, rebookings of tourist plans. We originally were set to hit about 60,000 visitors for that month. But instead, you can see at the top there, we've only recorded 17,310. So the good news is, historically speaking, whenever a storm hits, we're able to recover up to about 4 to 6 months afterwards. And so this, is not a pandemic, and it's isolated to the island. So our markets are very used to typhoons, and they understand the nature of it in terms of rebooking and coming back. And so that kind of sets the tone of what our projections for the coming months as well as FY24 look like. If you move to the next page for July, the first 7 days, we're already at 8,701 with, you'll see a strong return from the Japan market. And this is good news for us because we've always anticipated a stronger return for the summer, even though it's not at the level we wanted to because the storm kind of offset it. But because of that May 7th relegation in Japan of moving the COVID-19 pandemic to a regular flu, this gave a lot of confidence in visitors to start rebooking or looking at their destinations now. So good news there. And at this rate, we are looking to hit around 35,000 to almost 40,000 visitors for that month. Prior to the storm, we were averaging about 55,000 a month. So again, you can see that this is a very V-shaped recovery, that we're back on track in the subsequent months. If we look at calendar year to date, January through July 7th, we're over 300,000, with, of course, Korea being the bulk of that. They've been coming back strong since 2022, and we only anticipate, a more positive return with the Japan market later in the year. Okay. To the next page for fiscal year to date. Our original projection was 670,000 for FY 2023. But because of the storm, we had to adjust. There were cancellations. Seat capacity is always fluctuating. I believe the latest I have is about 46,000 seats have been canceled for this fiscal year, and those are potential arrivals. So what we've done is we've adjusted our projection, and I'll show you that in the next slides. I did want to give everybody kind of a sample of what our historical arrivals look like, so you can see the growth going into the 2017, 2018, 2019. All those yellow bars are the peak of what our visitor industry was. And as we've mentioned multiple times publicly, GVB has always anticipated a U-shaped recovery, and if you look at the red circle there is kind of highlighting that U shape. We do anticipate, and hopefully in line with other international organizations, to have some sort of semblance of 2019 by 2025. So you'll see there, the green bar is 2023 for 2024, and I'll talk about that projection. We're looking to hopefully double that return. Next slide. So this really, this is our road to recovery, especially after Typhoon Mewar. You'll notice the pink line at the top is our cap. That is 2019. That has always been our baseline of when we've recovered. On the way bottom, FY 2021, that purple line, that is our floor. When arrivals were at that level, we were basically pushed all the way back to 1970s in terms of visit arrivals for Guam. So prior to the storm, we were actually tracking above our projection. If you follow the yellow line, those were actual arrivals. And as you see in May, we've had to adjust. You'll see that dip compared to the original projection of the green line. And what we're seeing, or what we'll probably end up with, is about 100,000 visitors off from our original projection. So instead of the 670,000 as planned, about 570,000 could be welcomed for this year. I did want to throw in 2024 to give everybody the good news that we are on track of what we've been anticipating. You'll see the recovery from Typhoon Mewar there. And then 2024, the green line, if you follow that, we are, by 2025, hopefully reaching the same levels of 2019. For FY 2024, we do anticipate around 60 to 70% of that 2019 level, and then hopefully we can fully recover afterwards. Finally, just to put it into a table format so everyone understands how much we recover each month. For this year, we're looking at a little over 570,000. Again, 2019 was the 1.6 million, our record. And this year would really recover about 35% of that. And finally, for FY 24, our forecast for this year is just a little over 1 million. Again, it's always a factor of seat capacity. And our seats are about 71% of what we used to have in 2019. When we welcomed 1.6 visitors, we had 2.2 million seats. Right now, we have about 1.6. So we do anticipate about 1 million visitors filling those seats, which is representative of 64% of what our baseline would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have the Department of Labor. Gary, are you ready?
Yes, good afternoon. The first item was addition to item 8, federal assistance. So far to date, 1.4 billion in federal awards have been awarded. The largest amount is for contracts, followed by direct payments, grants, federal assistance, and loans. The primary awarding agencies are Department of Defense, followed by Social Security Administration, Department of Agriculture, Health and Human Services, and Veterans Administration. And the largest percent of the awards are Department of Defense, 43.87%. The additional information on item 7, the disaster assistance. There's 3 different forms of disaster assistance. One is direct payments, and so the federal disaster direct assistance payments were 57.7 million. These are obligations. Some of that money probably is not expended yet. Also, federal disaster assistance grants in the amount of 19.82 million. And that's 1.37% of the federal funds received are allocated for Guam so far this fiscal year. And federal disaster loans, which amount to 3.34 million to date. Additional federal funding for the typhoon that's not received yet and recorded is for the disaster unemployment assistance. The department submitted a budget request of 26.6 million, and the first, I believe, $1 million was already provided to get set up, but the funding for the payments has not yet been approved. But we're anticipating that in addition to the other 3 forms of assistance received so far. The next section is the economic outlook. The economic outlook is going to be driven primarily by the increases in tourism. We're starting at a very low level in 23, so we can almost expect that tourism will increase substantially this year and next year. The other primary source of inflows of funds driving the economy are defense spending. That includes the personnel as well as construction. So the first chart I have is showing the workload projections, and we're at FY23, and as you can see in the chart from NAVFAC Marianas, the United States Marine Corps is going to be the largest section and will grow very rapidly in the next few years, but it's not limited to that. The United States Air Force, the Navy, and other branches expenditures will contribute. So notice this is kind of a pyramid that in FY23 we're just ramping up and expect to ramp up considerably in the years ahead. Another item that will affect Guam is the proposed missile defense. The agency in January, the MDA awarded a $500 million contract to Lockheed Martin to develop Guam's air and ground missile defense system, which is anticipated to be delivered in 2024. The agency is asking for more than $800 million to develop and begin constructing the missile defense architecture. Obviously, much of this or most of this will be spent off island, but some of it will get spent on island as well. The date for comments is June 27, so that's open for comments if somebody wants to make comments on that. So in looking at the future, we have some information going forward about how the economy is going to go based on, first of all, the plans that are shown in the workload projections, and then new information on the FY 2024 NDAA Guam MILCON budget shows that there's the president's request was a little over 1.5 billion. The House has agreed so far to a little over 1 billion. And to see how that compares to the prior NDAA forecast, I've included a table in our economic outlook that was submitted with the budget. So the plan for fiscal year 2024, I believe, exceeds all other appropriations. The highest prior appropriation, it was in fiscal year 2021 of 973 million, and last year was 522 million. So the planned appropriations for this year is double what it was last year. So that's building up. There's first the plans, then the appropriations to fund the plans, and then the awards. So the next page is the MILCON award forecast. Shows that for this fiscal year, 2023, the plan is to award $410 million in additional projects. The next slide shows the projects already awarded for DoD construction through calendar year 2022. are approaching 800 million, and FY or calendar year 2022 was the largest ever DoD construction contract dollar amount. In addition to the DoD projects, the building permits issued by Department of Public Works for FY 2022 were well over 600 million, and the largest ever on Guam also, except I think in one year in the building boom of the hotel district, a fiscal year was over 800 million. The combined construction planned for local public works permits and DoD contracts exceeds $1.4 billion. So this work that was contracted or permitted in 2022, some of it is short-term, some of it is multi-year that will take a number of years to build. So that will spread out over a number of future years. It's not going to all be immediate. Another indicator of work that will be taking place is the H-2B foreign workers have been increasing. The latest number ending for the months June 30 this year, 2023, shows the number of H-2B workers has gone up to 4,351. The next table shows the trend in the increase in H-2B workers. So this table starts in March 2019. It's gone from 859 and steadily increased every quarter up to the current number in June 2023. Often things don't go as fast as they're projected to go, but there's so much pent-up demand with contracts already awarded, and that the number of contracts awarded that are in process keeps growing. So it's virtually assured that these numbers will grow further. Another thing that will affect the economy is retail. The construction and the opening of Don Donkey store is scheduled for this summer. I haven't got an update, but it was previously scheduled in July or August, so probably it could be delayed a bit, but that should be opening soon. Inflation has been an important issue for the economy in the U.S., and Guam follows along with a comparable inflation rate, but U.S. inflation rate just dropped to 2.97% compared to 4.05% last month and 9.06% last year. This is lower than the long-term average of 3.28%. The U.S. inflation rate is the percentage increase in a chosen basket of goods and services purchased in the U.S., which increases in price over a year. The table's out of place, but the next page after that is inflation and interest rates. The inflation year over year hit a 40-year high of 9.1% in June 22, but has now fallen for the last 12 consecutive months. The impact of this inflation is not only higher prices for consumers, but also resulted in the Federal Reserve action to increase interest rates. So that's hurting the housing sales and increasing costs for consumers with higher interest rates. And further increases are anticipated, but if inflation appears to be getting under control, the increase in these interest rates is likely to be mitigated. Inflation also has an important impact on the budget because the revenue numbers are impacted by not only the spending and economic activity, which has grown especially in the construction industry, but the dollar price of the goods and services. So if the prices are higher, then the businesses receive more dollars, and that results in higher revenue in some categories for the government of Guam. So the preceding table is the business privilege tax history. I found it interesting that in June of this year, when there was virtually no tourist, that the and some additional exceptions to the gross receipts applicability, that the gross receipts in June 2023, with almost no tourists, exceeded our best year of tourism in calendar year 2019 in the month of June of 25 million. So I view this as kind of a floor for the revenue for the next few years going forward, because tourism will recover and there will be more defense spending. So for just the first 6 months of the year, the GRT is up 15% from the base year of comparison of 2019.
Thank you, sir. Now we're going to open for discussion, but I'd like to also recognize my other colleagues that have joined us, Senator Joanne Brown and Senator Roy Canata. I'd ask for discussion, I'll ask Senator Tello, if you have any questions you want to pass to the panel, and then we can just move along and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did have just a couple questions with regards to the excess revenue on TAF for GVB. For TAF. In the budget bill, in the FY23 budget bill, we made an amendment that any excess revenue in TAF would go to GVB directly. So as far as any kind of, you're looking at the special funds here, and I'm seeing that we're in the red in many of these special funds. So even though it's showing 8,539,000, it's not like we're going to take that money and cover Guam Highway or Healthy Futures Fund or any of the other ones. But it was never mentioned, Lester, when you were talking about special funds, about that one amendment, and you're familiar with it?
Yes, and thank you for the question, Senator Titagui. GVB has been in contact with both BBMR and DOA. And the initial request was made maybe about a month and a half ago. There are some reconciliations with the fund balances that Mr. Byrne would like to address first prior to releasing any excess revenues. There are funds that we have covered previously that he would like to address, and then provide the excess to GVB. So it's a work in progress.
Okay, thank you. The other one is the $20 million that you spoke about earlier, that you've created an account that actually has $28 million in this account for DOE. And then yet we gave the authority to spend $50 million on another legislation. And is any of that $50 million the authority, the governor's given the authority to spend up to that, is any of that going to go to DOE? Because it's showing here that $8 million is coming from the reimbursement from the quarantine that you got from FEMA, right? That you were explaining certain things you're getting from FEMA, right? I think it was 3.1 million. And then what was the other one?
Well, it was 3.1 for food commodities.
Food commodities.
And
okay.
then like 4.9 or whatever for the reimbursement for the QFAC
Okay, yeah.
that we got. So
That's 28, right? The 28
that's
that's
basically
in the
where
account.
those three sources.
Right. And of course, you know, they need a whole lot more than that. So is any of the 50 million anticipated to go to DOE to assist them?
As I mentioned earlier, Senator, we are very much aware of the need to help DOE, and there was two pieces of legislation. One was 37-17, and then you guys passed something else that gave the governor additional authority to be able to provide assistance to the Fishermen's Co-op, power generators for DOE, and establishment of shelters and temporary housing subsidies within that same, you know, recovery scheme. So the $20 million, the agreement that I have with the former acting superintendent was that we were going to take the bulk of what it was that they need, have them do the D-Land tickets up at Homeland and draw against those funds to facilitate mold, fence repair. I just got done speaking with Franklin Cooperners, who basically says that he would need an infusion for the people who are manning the shelters. And I said, send me an email, and I'm very open to being able to take storm-related, certainly FEMA reimbursable staffing requirements that you have that you feel like you're unable to shoulder, and I will gladly assist you in being able to provide funding for that effort. So that was just something that we discussed right before this meeting.
Okay, thank you. The talking about, getting reimbursed from FEMA, I know that we have to use some of our money first, right? If I'm not mistaken, I heard $17 million is what we need to have up front in order to get that reimbursement. So it's like we put the money up first and then they give us the reimbursement. Is 17 million sound about right on, having?
No,
Okay.
I don't think, from what I understand, Senator, everything has a project, right? And once a project is closed out with the local money, then we're looking at the FEMA reimbursement, and we're supposed to be following and towing the line so that we don't have any issues with supporting documentation for the reimbursement. That has been drilled into everybody's head time and time again. So I believe once a project is closed out and is eligible for submission to FEMA for review, it doesn't have to have a dollar amount attached to it. Well,
It's matching
right now
amount,
it's
yeah.
75-25.
Right.
I'm hearing that there is some appetite for increasing the FEMA reimbursement 90-10. So I haven't seen anything in black and white, but we would love it if it was 100%.
Yeah, I'm sure we would. But so my question is, if it's 75-25, where are we going to get that 25?
We would front it first.
We would front it. And where's that money coming from? Is that?
That money is coming from the funds that I identified, the $28 million. So far, I have put
this is
together-
for DOE though.
No, everything. Okay, DOE is a major component of the recovery effort, but this is everything on the island of Guam.
So you're talking about the 20 million that was appropriated to DOE plus the 8 million on the reimbursement in this one account? I mean, where's that? The reason why, Lester, I'm thinking of 20 million is because that's what we gave DOE in a bill that we recently passed, and you even mentioned that. So what you're saying is that 20 million is in this one account, 28 million, I'm sorry, the reimbursement plus 20 million that was given to DOE.
Not plus. Don't add twice.
No, yeah, it's 28 total. Yeah, 28 total, which incorporates the 20 million that we gave to DOE. Okay.
Correct.
But you're saying all around GovGuam, all of GovGuam. So it's not just DOE that can go into this account and use their vouchers, so what you were talking about, and utilizing that system, but that means other entities in the government of Guam can go in there and reach in. Is that what you're saying?
So like a good example is the Guard, right?
Right.
So we have incurred costs for the utilization of the activation of the Guard to assist us. So there are
Cost, yeah.
timesheets for Guard members, and you can tell, they're not working like full 8 hours and stuff, and they're not working every day, but they're out there. And so those costs are costs that we're going to have to pay for from this $50 million recovery fund for the services that the Guard has provided, as well as like DPW. DPW is using their own money and incurring overtime. We will then basically summarize all the labor costs at some point in time with the supporting documents and then submit to FEMA for reimbursement.
Why are you commingling this $20 million for DOE and then taking the reimbursement and putting it all in one account when it was clear in the budget law that, or not the budget law, in the bill that we passed that 20 million is strictly for DOE?
Well, subsequent to that, ma'am, you gave us full authority to find within the general fund $50 million.
Oh, so you're taking,
Well, but then again, remember, I had
Oh,
a conversation with
yeah.
the acting superintendent. This wasn't a situation.
well, I'm
in
pretty
which
sure
there
this
was no
superintendent might not approve, but, taking their 20 million that was appropriated to them and the full intention of the legislature to do that, but we will get to that, when time comes, and I guess, we'll have to discuss this if there needs to be language to strengthen the intention of the legislature by putting $20 million toward DOE and not to be commingled with other agencies on reimbursements. The other question I had is, with the OPA provided the report on the audit not being prepared in time, and of course, it's nobody's fault except, Mother Nature took its course, we all know. And so there is as an issue here because, with the budget, being passed, we rely on that audit, beforehand. And it usually comes in, if I'm not mistaken, Speaker, about July or June, during June 30th. So this is not very helpful, but can you kind of give us a guesstimate? Because some of the bills that we passed in this FY fiscal year, the 23 fiscal year, was utilizing money of excess revenue in FY 22. So can you kind of tell me, I've heard that we are like in the negative based on FY 22 excess revenues. Do you have kind of a guesstimate on where we are right now? And knowing what really is the reality of the FY22 excess revenue?
I hesitate to give an estimate. And because I'm not sure, the reason that the audit is delayed is there was an issue with the OPEB. And with the OPEB number, depending on how big it is, could make a very substantial difference in what the bottom line looks like. I know that initially I thought that the administration was going to announce sometime this month what they thought the surplus was. I cautioned against that because I said, until I get an audit, I don't want anybody talking about a surplus. But I don't know whether or not they're still insistent that there is, and I'm not going to speak for them. But until I get an audit, until I get the audited number, I hesitate to give you a guesstimate.
But thank you, Speaker. Other than that, Mr. Chair, I'll just, I have no one there. We'll have it there.
All right, thank you. Senator Brown, do you have any comments or questions for anyone in the panel? And then you're followed by Senator Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the BBMR director elaborating on the 20 million because we just had a status hearing with DOE earlier this morning, and the current administration, including their deputies there, didn't seem to be or have the impression that they were receiving the 20 million. So is there a disconnect in information?
I believe that the acting superintendent briefed members of her senior management staff prior to her departure. The message was clear, the intent was clear, the assistance and the efficiency was clear. It wasn't done in the middle of the night without any discussion with the acting superintendent. So does Mr. Coupeners have a piece of paper that he can show you? No. Did I have a long conversation with former Speaker Wampat? Yes. Was she in agreement? Yes.
Well, I appreciate that, but what's important to us is what's on the record and what the current public officials understand. Have they been formally notified as to how these funds are being spent? And I'm assuming DOE, if the appropriations being made to DOE, would have a say on how that money is to be spent.
Yes, they know that the priority for the mold mitigation and the DLAN tickets for that effort have been submitted, and action will be taken as soon as conditions allow. And the funding is there to help facilitate the remediation of mold and other issues associated with sanitary conditions that may have been caused by the storm. So we're working with them. I think Mr. Cooper-Nurse is well aware of what it is we're doing, but I do not fault him for not being able to, make public statements simply because we did this in a manner so that we would have funding available to address the recovery costs. And again, we're making the Department of Education a very, very high priority in these efforts. So if there's a need to have a discussion, I think my conversation with Mr. Cooper-Nurse prior to today and just today, maybe he just feels a little uncomfortable because what was done under the guise of 3717 and subsequent legislation.
Well, however, I just think we just need to have official record and formality in the process so that the official representatives from Department of Education, when they are asked by this legislature with regards to appropriations that have been made to the Department of Education, are in a position to officially respond and be factual with regards to the information we're providing. So hopefully you can go back and work with them and get that clarified, because that was just asked a few hours ago. They left the members of this body that was here earlier inquiring on the status of the Education Committee, that essentially they've not received the $20 million. So that to me is kind of,
That part is true. They didn't get it.
And they were not in a position to respond to it, which again, the appropriation, they did not respond to questions concerning the 20 million.
Why.
So I think, the appropriation was made to Department of Education. They officially should be able to respond to questions by the legislature. So hopefully, again, maybe you can help facilitate that information to the current management team.
Sure.
So that when they're asked, they are in a position to respond accurately. Going through these funds, and we just had the budget hearing with GMH last week, and interestingly enough, they had a considerable increase with regards to the Guam GMA Pharmaceuticals Fund. We were looking at maybe it was only tracking around $20 million, and they are making a request in this upcoming budget for $33 million. And I didn't get the impression in talking to Lillian Posadas last week, because I did ask, I understand what you're requesting and what you're putting in your budget, but the revenue is not there in that fund to fund the $33 million that you're asking for, which is a substantial difference from 19 to 20 million. How are they going to address that shortfall? So while you're presenting the budget of what the administration has proposed, there are a number of areas as we go through the department and agencies that are substantially above what the administration has proposed. And so it's going to be very interesting, because if we're only looking at a $10 million additional amount on record on revenue of what the administration's asking for, $10 million to the average person is a lot of money. To this budget, it's not. Doesn't give a lot of wiggle room if other things were to come up. So I just think it's important to note for the record, Mr. Chairman, and we know we've seen 15 all the way to DOE's increase of requests for $50+ million. The University of Guam almost trying to double their appropriation, and I'm sure your committee, including those of us that are members, will have to decide what those amounts will be, but they're staggeringly high. I would understand there's inherent increases that are going to be anticipated from one year to the next, but the incredibly high amounts that are coming in, considering where we're heading, really does make a big question mark in my mind, as it should for all of us. I wanted to ask the Guam Visitors Bureau, Mr. Fujikawa, last night we just had a briefing with regards to the missile defense system. Is that anything the Guam Visitors Bureau, and I appreciate the presentation you've made, very direct, very concise on what you are looking at for this remaining fiscal year and the next few years, what you're anticipating of tourists returning back to Guam, and that's very good news. But have you factored in what the impact will be in moving forward if we do move forward with this expansion of this missile defense system? What the impact would be to tourism if now all of a sudden we're viewed as a target for China? Will they still want to come to Guam and visit?
Can you hear me? Okay. To answer your question, not necessarily. And the reason why I say that is a lot of our markets do view Guam as a very safe destination. Regardless of the rhetoric, I mean, obviously there are some that are very skittish about what's happening in the region, but I think in terms of a booking factor or looking for an alternative destination, I think Guam still has a very strong marketing standpoint with our markets, and we do see a lot of demand to return. Again, I think the biggest thing that we're really focusing on at the Bureau in terms of strategic planning and long-term tourism development is kind of augmenting the experience on island. What we are seeing is that visitors are spending more money after the pandemic on experiences over commodities or souvenirs and things like that. So understanding that we do have a long way to go in terms of increasing our island experience, I think what's happening in the region isn't necessarily as detrimental in terms of their decision making. We are still America and Asia, and we're in their backyard. So, you know, this isn't threats and things like that are not necessarily new, especially to South Koreans, Japan. So.
You know, it's about almost 7, 8 years ago, about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and we had to deal with the threats from North Korea and the missile testing and all that. Did you see a dip back then at all with regards to visitors coming to Guam during that time frame compared to the potential, you know, if we're to look at this issue with the, you know, of course they're just doing their scoping meetings and things of that nature, but, you know, it looks like they anticipate that they're going to move forward with this, and it's just a message that that's going to send out, and how, you know, how does GVB going to counter that to encourage visitors to still come to Guam if we're looked at as a target?
I think the key there, or the beauty in this, is that our ability to diversify the different markets that we do have. We did see a slight dip when those threats were being made from the Japan market. However, we saw the Korea market increase in arrivals at the same time. So that diversity in how they view these threats really is a key in terms of sustaining any type of level that we're used to. So it does really help. They're not apples to apples, right, when it comes to our Asian markets, and those are pretty evident in how they respond to things like this. So.
Well, interesting to see the change now from Japan, from the Japanese coming to Guam to the increase of Korean tourists. So, you know, we'll pray. That's what we need to do. You know, and I appreciate our public auditor at least updating us on when he anticipates getting the report. We're anxious to see it because, again, things are not adding up. The administration's making their representation in their budget proposal of what the governor's requests are, which in many cases is very contrary to what department and agencies are actually bringing to us. I mean, we're not talking a few 100,000 here or there. We're talking in the millions. And I don't know where in some people's mind they think all this money is going to keep falling from heaven, you know, as we phase out of this pandemic and we phase out of this, you know, maybe slight bump in revenue as a result of this typhoon.
Senator, thank you very much for that question. It gives me the opportunity to formally apologize to the legislature for the delay in the issuance of the audit. Last year, when Deloitte announced that it was going to close down, my office went through 25 RFPs to get new external auditors for 25 different agencies. Those contracts were all sent to the previous Attorney General before he left. Unfortunately, they weren't all signed.
Wow.
And when the new Attorney General came in, he imposed different rules and different criteria. And as a result, two contracts were only signed last week. For the contract for the Chamorro Land Trust and for the Ancestral Lands Commission. It just got lost in the shuffle. I mean, I had to keep texting and calling to ask them to please move it, and now it's sitting up in Adelup. I hope Lester can get them to to finally sign those last two. But also after EY got the new contract, they had to address OPEB, which is a big part of the audit. It's substantial. A lot of the agencies, when the OPEB was first implemented 3 or 4 years ago, complained because it really reduced their bottom line. And so it is a big number that has to be included. The OPEB has to be in the audit for each of the component units, the 20 component units, before the final number can go into the GovGuam-wide one. One agency, PBS, felt that it was imperative that they get their audit out before a certain date because their deadline was coming up, and they didn't want to lose funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They were told by EY that if they insisted on an audit being issued before the OPEB number had been finalized or had been agreed upon, it would be a qualified audit. They were given the opportunity to mull that over, and they made the decision that they wanted their audit out anyway. And it did come out, and those of you that read it showed that it was qualified because the OPEB number was not in there. The rest of the GovGuam agencies, the big ones, all the component units, GWA, GPA, PAG, did not want to do the same thing as PBS. They knew that a qualified audit would negatively impact them in the market. And so they were willing, well, not so much that they were willing, they were upset, but they realized that they had nothing that they could do. We finally got EY and DOA and KMS, the actuary for the GovGuam, to have a meeting. And after a number of meetings in the middle of the night for Mr. Byrne and to get the meeting together with KMS and EY, they finally agreed that EY's insistence that the OPEB had to be redone was going to be redone because the number would be substantial. And GovGuam did not want to issue with qualified as the outcome. And so just last week, they finally came to a final resolution. KMS is doing some final calculations, and we're hoping that before the end of the week, that the revised OPEB numbers will be issued by KMS and accepted by the EY actuaries, and so that we can finalize the component units and finalize the GovGuam audit. That's all I can say. And also, when we did the new contracts, all the contracts stated very clearly in the contracts, all the component units were to get issue their audits by February 28th of the year. Because I wanted all of them done by February 28th so that all of them would be ready so that GovGuam would have them and be able to issue it by March 30th. Unfortunately, because of this OPEB issue, it got kicked over. I appreciate your comment to our questionnaire that next year I'm going to try my best to make sure that the number that the audit is out in time. And so I apologize to all of you. I mean, as the former chair of this committee, I understand the need for this thing for all of them, for all of the departments. But it was an issue of the actuaries, and I don't blame EY. They had to send the numbers up to national, and their actuaries in New York said, no, we're not accepting this number because there was a significant other event that occurred, and the numbers should be redone. And it became a fight, and it only just recently got resolved. And so I apologize for the delay, but the contracts are supposed to be, all state a completion date, February 20 for the component units. Gov Guam was supposed to be March 30th because I had promised this legislature 4 years ago I would get it, and I've been trying. Unfortunately, this year it just blew up more than Maywar.
Well, we certainly appreciate, Public Auditor, that you're staying on top of it. I know even the previous fiscal year, we had certain few agencies that were very late in providing you information. I know you've been on top of that, and you will continue to be. I understand some of these circumstances are beyond your control, but I know you'll continue to stay adamant on it because it is critical for us, certainly to see ultimately what the audited amounts are, because this legislature, unfortunately, loves to spend money and has appropriated unaudited funds from one fiscal year to the next. For me, that's not responsible fiscal funding, but that's why I don't vote for them, but majority chooses to do so, and I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're properly accounting for the money, that we're appropriating real money, because back in the old days, we just appropriate whether the money's there or not and leave it up to the governor to figure it out, whether they have it to appropriate or not, and the story goes on, and it's just not responsible. We're not being responsible in terms of our duties here, and I think it's important that we have, and we have very much confidence in your office in providing this information to us. So hopefully as we move forward, we're making more responsible decisions, because I think the party's over. I think we have, because of the increased costs that this leadership in this legislature has put on the burdens of our people, there's going to be far less money to move around. As other things come up, we're going to have less resources. If we have another typhoon or two, where's the revenue going to come from to cover Guam's share? I hope it doesn't, because we just don't have a lot of wiggle room left. Just to add on, GMH, I mean, they came before us last week and it sounded all good. How much do you owe in vendor payments? $24 million. $24 million. There are agencies in the government of Guam that don't even have anywhere near that to even operate. So, it looks good on paper, and yeah, we got $10 million, yeah, come on. We're not even looking at what debts have been accumulated this fiscal year, what's going to be owed upon, and whether or not the money's going to be there to pay it. I mean, good or bad, I think we just need to know what the real information is, and hopefully we can make more responsible decisions. So thank you so much for being here and providing your input, and also, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to ask questions and comment.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just put in one last thank you for the support that you give our office. But the other thing that needs to be done is Department of Administration has to be given assistance to move forward with the pay scale for the accountants and the auditors, for Rev and Tax and for Department of Administration. I poached one of Revenue and Taxation's best employees because of the assistance that you provided us. But the thing is that they're collecting all the money. They need the accountants there, and they need the auditors there, and so it's imperative that they're properly paid, compensated. The plan that Mr. Burns has proposed in the market premium pay needs to be adopted at the earliest possible date, because accountants, the kids at this university, need to realize that there is a future, and if they see the salaries are going up, they'll go into accounting. The unfortunate thing is accountants, the university's just not producing enough, and we're just all stealing from each other. And so it's imperative that the university students realize that there is a future in accounting and that they can get decent pay. And so with the premium pay, the market premium pay, it'll help Revenue and Taxation do their auditing. It'll help Department of Administration, which handles $1 billion and doesn't even have a CFO yet, right? They don't have a CFO.
They'll just steal it from you.
No,
Anyway,
but
Speaker.
the thing is that they need it. And the other largest agency is the Guam Department of Education. They don't have an accounting staff. They've all been leaving. And so they have, you know, $300 million that they're spending and can't, you know, really need to account for. They need to get that. So I make the plea, please help with Department of Administration get the salaries up for these individuals so that they can provide you the numbers that you need. Thank you very much.
Hopefully, there's something left after the 22% pay raise. Thank you very much,
Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Roy, do you have any comments or questions? Because then we're going to be ready to wrap this up.
Yeah, well, just very brief. I just wanted to thank the panel for being here today. It's a very esteemed panel. Certainly great minds put these numbers together. And obviously, we just need to do a little bit more homework with all these numbers. Obviously, being a freshman senator, I need to look at this more thoroughly and go over it more feverishly to make sure that we're not writing bounce checks anywhere, right? So I thank the panel for being here today. GVB, we certainly want to make sure our tourism isn't running away from us because we're going to get bombed or anything like that. But, you know, we'll take it as it comes. DRT, let's just keep tracking the Healthy Futures Fund. You know me. That's all I'm asking. Keep the tax trail on that tobacco companies and the alcohol taxes. Sorry, not to you, Ms. Lazama. Okay, that'll be all. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Senator Caneta. Is there anything else the members of the SES would like to present? If there is none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Second, thank you. The committee will conclude this meeting. It's now 3:55. Jesus Mercy for your attendance and participating in today's meeting. And for those at home, thank you for watching. Please be safe.